welcome. And as Peter said, this is the first Our Town for 2012. And I want to particularly acknowledge the Dali and Hank Hine for supporting and having this program. This is a program that is especially dear to me because it's about the issue of identity. How does a city form an identity? How does a person form an identity? How does a nation form an identity? And I think that that is a topic that we are so concerned with. And in conversation with Hank, we realized that what we needed to do was to start meeting the people who are voices in St. Pete. And what you saw in 2011 were particularly people who were born in St. Pete and who have really shaped the history, current history of St. Pete. And what you're going to see a little bit more this year are younger people, like Sandra, because...
Not so young.
Because history and what shapes our identity is both what the foundation is, but it keeps happening. And how that works, I think, is part of my interest in trying to figure that out. And I think that's why I'm so interested in this program. And I particularly want to acknowledge the Dali for it because typically, you know, museums are the places up on the hill. And they don't, you know, have a lot of free programs and encourage lots of people to come and have this sort of discussion. And I'm just so pleased, Hank, and I really want to acknowledge you this first time. And your staff that always works so hard. I mean, Peter Tush is just really great. And Eric, who's the tech person, we really need. So let me talk about why I've invited this young person here, Sandra Gadsden. If you remember, the very first Our Town, my guest was Andy Barnes, who is the famous editor, for me, of the St. Pete Times, now the Tampa Bay Times. And to me, a newspaper really shapes a city. It shapes how we think. It tells a story, and it tries to tell a story. Well, Sandra, to me, is synonymous with Neighborhood Times, which is now the St. Pete Times. And her job is to tell the story of the people, the neighborhoods. And I'll be out driving during the day, you know, 4th Street or at night. She's always there. I mean, it's like, why is Sandra walking
I never
over
sleep.
here? You know, how can she be over here? But
I'm like Berman, okay?
That's her job, and that's what we want to find out is who this person is and what stories she wants to tell. So the first thing I'd like to ask you is how you came to St. Pete.
Well, I won a national fellowship through the Newspaper Association of America, and I think that put me on the radar for the St. Petersburg Times because I chose to come to the Poynter Institute for Media Studies. I could pick several places, like in Reston, Virginia, where they were doing some UPI workshops. But I wanted to come to the Poynter Institute, and so I did. And before I got here, a friend of mine who had left the Jacksonville, I think it's called the Times Union, the Florida Times Union in Jacksonville, she had come to the St. Pete Times, and I was coming to visit her because she was in this strange place where she said there were a lot of little old ladies with blue hair. And so I said, I'll come a day early and we'll just kind of hang out and go to the beach. And the Times found out I was here and they asked me to come in and interview with them. And so I came in, and apparently I didn't realize it, but at that time, the Poynter Institute owns the St. Petersburg Times, and so there is a policy that if you attend the Poynter Institute, the Times couldn't touch you for 2 years, which is why they were adamant about me coming in before I enrolled at the Poynter. And so I did, And during the week that I was there was just no to call them, and they offered me a job. So I was recruited that way.
And how did you become a journalist?
Well, I actually wanted to be an artist when I was a kid. I had, you know, when you're in the schools, classes, in public schools, a class is defined by a number. And by the time you take Art 1 and Art 2, by the time Art 3 rolls around, the class shrinks. And so our principal said, we're going to have to cancel Art 3, and you guys are going to have to take another course. And what we did, we went out and we asked our friends, you got to sign up for this class so that we could keep the art class. And we did. We got 8 people. And so in Art 3, you were given a part of a wall to do a mural. And you had to come up with an idea, and then you had to defend it in front of the principal, the art teacher, and the guidance counselor. And once you got the approval, then paintbrushes and paint, and off you go. Well, I had a art teacher who was a bit too hands-on for me, and my mural idea had gotten approved, and you could come in during recess or, you know, at your free time and paint. And I can remember one morning I came in, and there was some orange paint in my subject's face, and I thought someone had snuck in and defaced my art. And so. The teacher, Mr. Pusey, had...
You even remember his name.
I'll never forget his name. So at any rate, he had gone in and he painted, and I was about to go to the principal's office, and he said, no, I did that. And I was like, why? He goes, that's the sun. And I was like, what sun? Yeah, he had defined where light was going to enter my art. And any artist in the room, you know, you're an artiste and you're particular about your stuff. I'll say stuff instead of the other word. But anyway, there was clearly a problem I had a problem with that. My mother worked at the Medical University of South Carolina, which was across the street from my high school. And me and Mr. Pusey from that point on. And so finally my mom said, I can't be coming over here from my job every day. So you need to pick another subject. And so I picked the student newspaper and the yearbook had openings, and so
it was second choice.
Yes. So.
But look what happened.
I know. Sometimes it's divine intervention, I guess. Yeah. So.
So from there, that was it? You knew?
No, I didn't know. I still thought, okay, this is what I'll do to get out of school, finish high school, and go on to college. And when I went to college is when I decided I wanted to be I studied political science pre-law, and was doing quite well in it, loved it. I loved politics until I got to constitutional law. And if anybody, lawyers out there, you know, constitutional law is the course you take. If you've ever seen Paper Chase, that film is based on constitutional law, and it's a life-changing experience to have to take 2 versions of constitutional law. And my dean decided he wanted to teach the class, and he had a symposium, and there were people from my school who went on to law school, people I studied with. They were a couple years ahead of me, and they came back with a nervous twitch after their first year in school, and I said, I don't think I want to do that.
So what school did you go to?
I went to South Carolina State in Orangeburg, South Carolina. So.
And what else did you do there?
Well, I was an all-star, all-American basketball player. I was on the national championship team. We won the national championship in Fargo, North Dakota. And that's the only time I ever wore everything in my suitcase at one time. So.
And what position did you play?
I was a small forward, believe it or not. I don't know if people in the room know who Alexander English was, but I played with his sister. I played against Magic Johnson's sister. And so, you know, it was something to do, and it paid for my education, so.
Yeah. Huh. Okay, so you leave college, you
Right.
got this degree, so how do you get a job?
Well, initially, I thought I had this grand idea that I was going to go home, and I told my dad I wanted to go to Europe to find myself. And he looked at me and said, find a job. And so, And so I went to the local paper, and I had been
And
doing.
how old are you now? 21?
Yeah, I was 21, and I was dabbling in photography at the time as well. So I went to the local newspaper, and I had already decided I wanted to be an editor. And so I walked in there, and they took me to the managing editor, and her name was Grace Cutkus. And she sat me down in her office, and she's sitting there looking at me, and she said, "So, what do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be an editor." And typically, most editors would laugh you out of the room. You know, you have no experience working in a daily paper. But she just leaned back and she says, "Okay, why don't we test you?" And I guess she figured once the test scores came in so low, I would just go away. But I aced the test. You
did very well, yes.
And so 2 days later, I walked out thinking I'd never hear from her again. But 2 days later, she called me. And she said, you scored really well. Nobody's ever scored that high on our entrance test. But the position we have right now is for someone with more experience. But the next time we get an opening, you're it. And so that came less than a month later. So they called me back, and so they made me an editor. And
so you learned on the job. You didn't go to journalism school.
No, I studied political science. But I think a lot of times when you find, most newspapers, if you can find homegrown talent, you have automatic sources. People who grew up in a community, your church, your school, people who your parents knew, extended family. Those folks will talk to you when they won't talk to anybody else from the paper. Mm-hmm. And so that became, I had an advantage in that way. So there were times when folks at the Citadel would not speak to the education writer, or the people in the Navy from the Charleston Naval Base wouldn't speak to the military writer. But I knew somebody tied to something, 6 degrees of separation, and so we got in that way. And so those are, and that, I think that's one of the reasons we were able to persuade the paper to come up with a scholarship to grow their own talent and to send them to the University of South Carolina for 4 years, and each year you had an internship through your 4 years. And so
one of the things that I've discovered through these our towns is that education and family and the community, the neighborhood, mm-hmm. really is important in shaping people who become very successful and prominent in a community. Now, was that the case with you? Was your neighborhood an important factor in your growing up?
Oh, definitely. My mom was a stay-at-home mom until my youngest sister went to school. Then she went to work at the Medical University of South Carolina. And there were times when, I think for 3 or 4 years, where we would get home before she did. But if you stepped out of line, there were countless neighbors waiting in line to tell on you. And sometimes you got a scolding from the neighbor, so then you got it when the parents got home. So there were everybody who lived in that block knew my extended family. They knew if my mom was not at home from work, they knew her boss's phone number. They knew my aunt's phone number. They knew the minister's phone number. So it was one of those it takes a village kind of things. That, a lot of us grew up in those, and they were real. And so for us, it was definitely real. Charleston is smaller than St. Petersburg, but each neighborhood is like its own little hamlet. And so, and people take responsibility for one another. So.
And were your parents involved in the community? I mean, you're so involved here. Was that something that you learned from your parents, to be involved in the community?
Yes, I remember someone who worked for the supervisor of elections lived around the corner from us. And when we were old enough, he would come to our house and ask my dad, "We need about 4 kids to work the election, work the polls." And initially, when you're young, you become the person, you know, when they're driving, they go pick up a senior citizen to go make sure that that person can vote. We were the people, the kids who just jumped out of the van or the station wagon and rang the doorbell. You know, Miss Mabel, we're here to get you, you know, to go vote. Or you were required to stand so many feet away from the polls, but you had back then people voted in straight tickets. So if you had the straight Democratic ticket or the straight Republican ticket, you would, that's what you passed out. And for us, it was like, oh, you know, if you work for that group over there, you get Burger King. And if you work for that king over there, you'll get, and I can remember as I got older, I'll never forget the first one I worked for. I worked for Brantley Harvey. No, Charles Pug Ravenel was the first one I worked for. And he was this young hotshot, sort of like a Mark Rubio of the Charleston area. And I can remember coming home after the day at the polls, and me and my sister were telling my father about our day. And he was just very happy that we participated. And then you turn on, he said, okay, now you got to sit down and watch the returns. And so we're sitting there watching the returns. And of course, we can't see all of it because it's a school night. And I'll never forget, the returns started coming in for Charles Pug Ravenel, and he was getting pummeled, and I started crying. And my dad was like, you can't cry. This is democracy in action. You know, I was like, well, my guy's losing. Yeah. And so, you know, you kind of learn through that. And eventually, you know, we continued to work for that gentleman continued to come to our home to ask my father if he would allow us to work. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was a person on the phone calling people to remind them to vote. And you know, it was just mind-blowing to me. People would say, okay, if it doesn't rain tomorrow, I'll vote, you know. and it was just, you know, any excuse to not exercise your right as a citizen of the United States.
So your parents were really important to you?
Oh, definitely. We were a tight-knit family, and I was sharing with someone earlier today that my father was... I think he set the standard for a lot of us, and he had a lot of friends and coworkers, but what we saw around our house was family. You mainly saw relatives. We had most of the male relatives in my family were either ministers or police officers. And so,
what did your dad do? My
dad was he worked in engineering at Charleston Naval Shipyard. And that's where he retired from.
So when you're here, so I'm bringing you from Charleston back to this wonderful city of St. Petersburg, and you're at the St. Pete Times, and you eventually get to be connected with Neighborhood Times. What exactly was the vision for that?
I can remember when I came here, we had something called City Times, and it was a broadsheet. And
what does that mean?
That means, well, this is a tab,
here.
And the broadsheet is what you get in the A, B, and C section, the sports, A, B, and sports, those are broadsheets. And so I do remember the editors for City Times had a tough time filling a broadsheet without putting in stories from Pasco County or from Clearwater. And time again, what we would hear from the residents of St. Petersburg is, we don't care about those places. we don't, why are you putting in that Hernando story? I don't care about that. And we hear that time and time again because we are we focus on local news more so than what people in the room might realize because, you know, we have a 5-county coverage area, and there's a paper called Hernando Times. It's daily. There's a paper that's called Pasco Times. There are 3 different editions of that are daily.
But
that's part of a coverage.
Of your paper.
That's part of the Tampa Bay Times. I work for the St. Pete Times, but anyway. Well, I do. My paper.
Yeah,
it's called the St. Pete Times. We changed the Neighborhood Times name, so I can still answer my phone saying St. Pete Times. But at any rate, the goal was to to be more informative to our readers, which Pinellas County, and particularly South Pinellas County, had high penetration. And so
what does that mean?
That means there are more households in South Pinellas County that actually subscribe to the St. Petersburg Times, and lingo, it's penetration. And I remember back when we first started Neighborhood Times, nobody liked it. They wanted, we don't want that little paper. You know, they looked at the, you know, like we cut
tabloid.
up, they looked at the tabloid and said, we want the big paper. You know, but then once they took the time to read the content, then it became extremely popular. And when we started Neighborhood Times, I was not the editor. I supervised a core group of people who were responsible for designing the paper and writing the headlines and putting pictures in. And so I was not an assigning editor, but I was one of the editors that led a team that you guys would never see. But as time went on, I became an assignment editor with Neighborhood Times, and it was then that it became very humbling in that people would see you on the street and they felt compelled to tell you how they received their paper. They would, it was, oh yeah, I go to my driveway and I pick it up and I throw out all the guts and I put the Neighborhood Times on the top and I go in my house and I read it. Or I save it for later when I can, you know, they might not have time on Wednesday or on Sunday, and they save the paper, or they tear out the listings for what's happening at a college or at the Dali, you know, and so that they would know. They put it on their refrigerator on the magnet, and so they would know different venues to go to later in the week.
Once you told me, this was years ago when we first met, that you people would have you to their newspapers in the rest of the country to advise them about how to do a Neighborhood Times. So why is this so successful? Why is it so difficult, I guess? Why don't other papers figure this out?
I think, well, some of the papers like the New York Times and the Washington Post, you know, they are national papers, and so they focus more on their national audience. But then they realize there is money to be made in the local paper, and so they've come. In some instances, I attend national journalism conferences and speak about the importance of local news. In other instances, they will come in. They will fly a team down just to see how we do what we do, and in many instances.
Why isn't it sort of obvious? How to get local news. Why is this a challenge for them?
Well, I can't speak to other organizations because I don't work for them,
yes.
But I think sometimes the focus is getting the national ad buys, and it's not that big of a deal in a city that's well developed like New York and Washington, D.C. You're not going to be talking about development because it's grown out. Here in St. Pete, it's a little bit different. Much of the Sun Coast, it's very, very different. I mean, when I moved here in '93, we joked that, you know, after sundown, you can get tumbleweeds going down Central Avenue. But it's changed so much, you know. There were, I can remember across the parking lot from the St. Pete Times, there were, I would not go across that street west from our parking lot because, you know, you just didn't feel safe. And now you look at what has happened, and you see people walking all night long. And these are people going to music venues. They're coming from the movies. They're attending events, and so there are other cities like Tampa, who, you know, they are Jacksonville, that the downtown shuts down after 5 o'clock, and there's a lot of things that are admirable about what we've done here, what has happened in St. Pete. I think there's a lot of forward thinking. There's still room for some growth, and to do some things differently, but I think St. Pete is the model for a lot of cities, and what they can do with you know, having a livable, walkable downtown.
So when people would come to learn about how to do local news and neighborhood times, what would you tell them?
Well, one of the first things you have to do is tell people to get out of the car and start walking, or get a bus ticket, because I can tell you from my own personal experience, when we are driving, we miss so much, particularly when you are supposed to be the watchdog for a community. If you're not the type of person to walk a few blocks, or ride a bicycle, or then I suggest you get on the bus. You hear things, your hands aren't busy, your focus is everywhere. I can remember a few years ago I boycotted gas prices going up, so from late January to May, I rode the city bus. And the things I heard and the things I saw helped with our report, our daily report. I would come in, and I can remember one of my coworkers saying, well, what are you, some kind of tip magnet? Why are you getting all this stuff? And I was like, well, I took the bus to work today. I saw that building. I saw them clearing a lot. I wanted to know what's happening, and you have to be curious. And
curious is a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and so if you're not, and I'm the type, if I'm walking down the street and I see, I can remember when they were going to, when they were doing the renovation for what is now the cantina. I can remember the side door was open and I was walking to the dentist, and I saw these guys working in the kitchen. The door was open, so I said, hey, what's this going to be? And then the workers, they'll tell you everything. And so, so they're spouting off. I was like, really? A Mexican restaurant? You're kidding. They go, yeah, we're going to have margarita on tap. And I'm like, you're kidding. So they told you all this stuff, and then you go back down the street and say, well, I thought you went to the dentist. How'd you know all of this stuff? So I saw somebody on the way. And so sometimes it's just as simple as asking a question. You'd be surprised how open people are to tell, particularly when they're excited about a new project that's coming to town. And I can remember driving from where I live in Lakewood Estates up 9th Street, and I got this idea just because I could see all the cranes if you're driving from the south to downtown, and you saw them across the skyline.
Do you remember what year that was?
I think that was 2005 or 2006, and this is before, I think we only had the Cloisters and the Florencia at that time, and I remember seeing, you could almost envision what our skyline was going to become. And so I went back to work, and I went to the photo and news art department, and I said, I want to show people what the skyline is going to look like by 2009. And how can I do that? I didn't know that there was some program software called Lightwave where you could drop a building into an existing skyline, but there was. And so I told typically we have a photographer who specializes in aerial photography, and I wanted him to be hovered over the pier, but looking back at the city. But I didn't want him to shoot a photo straight on. I wanted him to shoot from up, pointing down. And that was one way to make sure you were able to help people visualize what downtown St. Pete was going to look like. And so they did it. And when we did it, a whole bunch of realtors wanted copies. The city called and asked if they could put it on their website. And about 7 or 8 other newspapers called and wanted to come down and say, hey, how'd you do this? And so sometimes it's just, you already know, because we've been writing. Every time a developer made an announcement, we had the artist rendering. And so we were already showing you what the building would look like, but we never put it in the skyline. And so sometimes it's helpful to help people understand, here's what's coming. It's just not 9 buildings. Let me show you what these 9 buildings look like in our city skyline. And so it was one of those where you think about it, but then to actually put it in action was a major coup for us.
And that's part of the sense of the identity of the city. I mean, this whole idea of identity happens over time.
Right.
So, and it's difficult when things change. So doing something like that is a way of, visioning what the city's going to be like. I think it's the same way with this issue of the pier now. Our city's going to change, and what's that going to be like, and what will it look like with this new lens or whatever. And it's going to change how we think of the city. The Dali sort of did that because it's such a prominent building now. And people, we all get a little uncomfortable. I mean, you change the name of our newspaper, and it's like, I remember I was like beside myself. I mean, change is very difficult. Just that I mentioned that, can you explain why that choice was made?
Well, how much time do you have? But
A quick version.
One of the things that Paul Tash has said about the name change is that, and it's true, more than 2/3 of our readers don't live in the city of St. Petersburg. When you think about our growth, TBT was an experiment to grow young readers. It's an experiment that has worked. TBT was never intended to be distributed in the city of St. Pete. It was geared toward young readers in Tampa. What happened that was interesting was people over 40 in St. Petersburg liked TBT too. So we put more boxes throughout the city. Well, what happened with that experiment was we went from having less than 30,000 readers in the city of Tampa to having over 115,000 readers in the city of Tampa. And so when that happens, we are now the largest newspaper in the state of Florida, but a young Harvard business grad who's never set foot in the state of Florida, doesn't know what the Tampa Bay area looks like, will continue to have that national ad put in the Tampa Tribune because the city of Tampa has a larger population, not larger circulation, but larger population. And so we continue to argue the point that we're the largest paper in Florida, we're the better paper in Florida, but that does not matter to someone who's never set foot in the state of Florida or in the Tampa Bay area. So we went from, I think the numbers were, we lost millions because of it. I mean,
because of the advertising.
Because of national advertising, we're fine with. It's not perfect, but we do okay with regional and local advertising. But national advertising, we weren't pulling $200,000 a month in some instances where those accounts used to be in the millions. And what we heard, not we, but the advertising people who flew to New York and tried to plead with the young people who made the decision, it didn't matter to them. Changing the name, and that's the feedback we got. Your name says St. Petersburg. You say St. Pete, and it's your name is hurting you. That was some of the feedback that we were getting. If you are the regional paper that you claim to be, why are you the St. Petersburg Times and not what the region? And I know I grew up at the St. Petersburg Times. I came to the St. Petersburg Times. Most of the people who work on the staff live in St. Petersburg. So I would encourage people. We get phone calls almost every day about the name change because the people who live in St. Petersburg feel betrayed. We understand that. We live in St. Pete too. We are your neighbors. I think we're all trying to grasp this and understand it from a financial perspective, because that's really where it is. And it's not like we invented some new lingo. Our teams, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Tampa Bay Rays, the Tampa Bay Lightning, we say we're from the Tampa Bay area when people can't understand where Dunedin and some other hamlets are. And so we are cheered everywhere except here about the name change.
Well, about St. Pete, a lot of when we talk about St. Pete, And even when you've talked about St. Pete, we really talk about this very little area downtown.
Yeah.
But St. Pete's really big.
It's very large.
And Neighborhood Times has to serve the
Right.
whole area. So what is that, given that you've done so much writing about this, how is it that people who live out near Tyrone, and how do they relate to people down here?
Well, one of the things we hear all the time, and I'm sure folks, the politicians do too, the only time people west of 16th Street matter is when it's an election time, it's an election year. That's when the mayors and people who want to be mayor go over there. And so we try to encourage our writers and our photographers for standalone images to go west of 16th Street because they are a part of the city. This is one, the city of St. Pete, for the people, I mean, there are people who are downtown who their entire lives are downtown. They walk, they go to dinner, and when you say Tyrone, they look at you like you're crazy. Or
it's
you say,
city.
Yeah, it's like in another orbit for some people. But those are our readers too, and we are just as responsible for them as we are downtown. Now, granted, there's more happening downtown. We used to have Kenneth City, Pinellas Park, they had their own section. It doesn't generate enough news to warrant that anymore, so it's now folded into Largo. But what is happening, and even the folks who live on the beaches, they pay attention to what's going on downtown. People in downtown might be interested in what's going on near Caddy's on Treasure Island or what's happening at John's Pass. But away from that, it's about St. Pete, east of 16th Street, really east of 9th ML King.
So when we talk about neighborhoods, how many neighborhoods are there in St. Pete? I mean, we have all these little neighborhoods.
Right. There's over 100 neighborhoods in the city of St. Petersburg. There are only about 50 to 65 that are registered under KONA, but there's over 100. Yeah. And
does the Neighborhood Times address all of them?
No. And I, there are a lot of neighborhoods that are far more active than others. There are some residents who will complain the only time you mention my neighborhood is when there's crime, and the truth be told, that's the only time anything comes up in your neighborhood is when there's crime. We don't have crystal balls on our desk. We don't have a webcam in every neighborhood. And one of the reasons I will go out into a community or go to a meeting to talk to people is sometimes you have to train people how to reach out to the paper. When someone calls and says, well, I want to buy an ad, if they're calling me, you don't want to buy an ad. And so I say, well, you're saying it wrong, because by the time they get to me, they've been transferred 5 or 6 times. They want to put an item in the paper about their son's soccer league. And so the language is, I would like to put an item in the paper. You don't want to put an ad in the paper, you want to put an item in the paper. And so I always tell people, don't send it to me. I get about 600 emails a day. You want to send it to local@tampabay.com. It feeds into a system of clerks, and they will funnel that to where it needs to go. That is your best bet. It will probably get in the paper, and if they have questions, they will call you. I say, when you do that, make sure you put your contact number in case they have questions, because we have a smaller staff, and if I'm having to stay an hour late because I'm cleaning out my email before it explodes, I'm not going to have the time to do that and go to meetings and deal with some irate customer, a reader who is mad because they didn't like that I thought the police chase was wrong. So
how much of the paper comes from people calling in with items?
Well, I don't know if you remember.
I didn't know this.
I wrote a column about the Big Easy. which was a big gambling vessel that sat on the waterfront. That came from a reader. A reader, he lived in your neighborhood, and he was sick and tired of seeing that boat just sitting there. And he wanted to know, I think I was at the Oxford and Dave's house, the Ellis's.
They're in the back.
Yeah, and he came up to me, approached me, and said, "What are they doing with that thing?" And I said, "I don't know." And so I made some phone calls. I went down to the marina, and I asked some questions and found out who the owner was. And I got to tell you, since I wrote it, I get calls every other week about the Big Easy, because there are tons of people who want to buy it and have it as a gambling vessel in the Tampa Bay area.
So what sort of responsibility do you feel as a reporter, as an editor, and now you do your own article, you know, sort of your opinion about things. What sort of responsibility do you feel to the city to, you know, tell these stories?
Well, first and foremost, try to be fair. You know, there are people who think, okay, so I wrote something about the mayor, so I must hate the mayor. I don't hate the mayor. I wrote something about the police chase, you know, going after a purse snatcher in rush hour. I don't hate the police. And so people form their own opinions based on just little things. And sometimes you have to ask questions about how things are being run. Because if you don't, things will be run amok. And so a lot of times we will get phone calls, just like the Clam Bayou issue. There was some people who just felt that the city was doing them wrong. So you are responsible for giving a voice to the voiceless. The people who call and tell you, I met with the city, or I met with these officials, and I asked them. I mean, nothing ticks me off more than a resident telling me, I talked to the city and I asked them, how would you feel if this was your neighborhood? And for a city official to say, well, I don't have to worry about that because I live in the old Northeast. You know, not the best thing to say if you're a city official. When you're talking about someone's home and a road being paved right in front of it. There are better ways to address the differences that they feel, but to tell them, I don't have to worry about that because I live somewhere else is not a good answer. And so of course, you want to get on the phone and say, well, I need to understand this a little bit better. There's always two sides to every story, and you try your best to tell both sides. One of the things that happens, though, is if the reader gets to us before we get to the city, and the city knows that you're working on the story, you're not going to get a phone call back in many cases. Not you, Elizabeth, but but there are times when we feel like we're getting the runaround, and they know that deadline's at 3 o'clock on Friday. And
what is this like? I mean, so you write these things and people get really mad at you. I mean, do you stay up at night and
No, I don't.
worry that this person hates me, and why did I say that? I should have said it this way. You know, does that happen to you?
Well, I have an editor too. And so one of my editors, sometimes I would file my column and I would, you know, send him a note saying it's there. And then he would spend some time in it, and then he'd look over and he's like, come on, let's go in and talk. And then, or he would send a message saying, hey, I'm ready to talk about the column. And sometimes I would walk in the door and he would say, I don't know you on Monday. And that's when you know there's some things need to be massaged. You know, he said, well, you really can't call them that. Let's massage just a little bit. And so, and over time you learn to tone it down a bit, because while you may have felt like, well, this person has, you know, just cause to have a problem with this, and how could the city possibly not understand this? You still need to, you know, try to stay in the middle as best you can, and a lot of times it helps when you're speaking to both sides. And I always tell people when they're, well, so-and-so called me from the Times and I just don't know what to do. I said, just call him, because if he only has one side, particularly when my reporters are struggling, and a source of mine happens to be the person the reporter's struggling with, and the source calls and says, well, can I talk to this guy? I'm like, it's not going to hurt to talk. You need to get your side in print as well. So I just think, it's important to help the reader understand both sides. The reporter struggles a lot of times, and sometimes when we get these calls about, well, it's one-sided, it's because you're on deadline and they're not getting the call back. And sometimes you might see a sentence that says, Officer Friendly could not be reached for comment. And that's because the writer had spent, several hours of the day leaving messages, going down to the police station, calling that person's supervisor, or calling Tish Elston to say, we're not getting a call back. And of course, Tish can't speak for every issue in the city.
This person?
Tish Elston, what is her title? She's city administrator. Yeah. And so she is helpful for us a lot of times when we can't reach the people we need to speak to.
So, Sandra, it sounds like you really have to live this 24 hours a day almost. So do you really love what you do?
Either that or I'm crazy.
Yeah, one or the other.
No, it's exciting. It's never boring, that's for sure. And every day is a new challenge, a different challenge. I mean, I can remember when Bill Maxwell worked full-time in our offices, and I would go over by his desk and I said, hey, Bill, how are you doing today? And he would say, oh, I've been called MF 20 times so far today. I'm having a great day. And so you just kind of take it with a grain of salt, And you are always on. I mean, there are, if news breaks and you're driving home from the Dali, you're going to pick up the phone, you're going to call somebody at the city desk and say, hey, do you know about this? There's a fireball down the street, there's a camera under the front seat of my car. You just pick up a camera and,
So in your position, how do you see your life as different than other people? I mean, do you get to go places that other people, do you get to ask questions that other people don't have? Do you get sort of privileges that other people don't have because of being press?
No. One of the things at the St. Pete Times, I mean, we are not allowed to take advantage of that. In the internet age, I would imagine anybody who's curious can ask these same questions too. And there are a lot of, one thing I love about working here is that we have well-informed readers. And I'll never forget when I first came to town, and I was living down at Isla, and a photographer took a standalone picture of some spoonbill beliads down by the Bocasiega Bay. And the caption read something, described some other species the next day. And there are all these retirees who are bird experts, and they made sure, they said, those are spoonbill beliads, you idiots, and they will they will let you know. And also, when you say someone is playing with a frisbee in the park, and you put that in the caption and you don't uppercase it and trademark it, then whammo lawyers will send you a letter saying you did not properly, recognize us, and from henceforth, you cease and desist saying it this way. And so, being here, you experience all of that too.
So you wear different hats. I mean, you aren't, Ken would hardly say it, you aren't just a reporter. I mean, you're very involved in the community in other ways. And when we had agreed that you would be the guest, I said, does this woman ever sleep? I mean, you have to do all of your reporting and writing, and then you sit on boards. You're always out all the time. So what else do you do in the community?
I hide.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. Actually, I'm very involved with the Dr. Carter G. Woodson African American History Museum. Some of our board members are here. And I was on the founding board of directors for a studio at 620 with Dave Ellis, and our founding board president, Michelle Ralph, is back there as well. And I was part of Leadership St. Pete. So once you do all of those things, you have these different networks, and every now and then the networks cross, and pollinate. I was also on the board, but it's not an active board like the other boards I serve on, but I was on the board of Saturday Morning Market as well. And so when you are, for people who go to Saturday Morning Market regularly, like I used to, I still go, but there was a time I went every Saturday. And what happens, it's a village. It's a village within the city of St. Petersburg, and what happens in a village, the villagers come and tell you things when they see you walking through. And so there are always story tips and story ideas, and you find the empanada family who brings their oven out to the, it's like, that's a story. And so you just stumble upon these things, and you find people from neighborhoods that don't have the same prominence of the old Northeast or the old Southeast, but they're doing wonderful things there. And so, like Central Oak Park, and so, and they will talk to you, or you might see a booth and you say, well, I don't know, what is this? And so leads back to curiosity. You just ask a question and you'll be amazed at what you get.
It's interesting that you call the Saturday Morning Market a village, because it really does, it has this vitality to it, and it really feels like a neighborhood, like this community's eating together, music, all these children, 8 million dogs.
Right. Right. And, I can remember growing up in Charleston, they would have this monthly thing called Agape. And people from different organizations would come as one. And so Agape is what happens at Saturday Morning Market. You see people from all these different neighborhoods and from outside of the city that think that what we have here is just absolutely wonderful. And
because it is.
It is. You don't have to sell me on it. And so they can't get enough of it. You can't find a parking space. Yeah, most days at Saturday Morning Market. But what's wonderful about it now is even when you park far away, we have this beautiful condo now, the Signature. And so when you're walking from many blocks away, you now have these folks who are just mesmerized by that fountain.
Oh, that
that waterfall. Yeah. And so it's this other little enclave that happens on the way to Saturday morning market. And so, you see a different kind of vibrancy. And I was just speaking to the woman who heads the foundation at the Mahaffey. And she worked for years for at least 3.5 years for Ruth Eckerd Hall. And now she works for the Mahaffey. And she's been here for over 20 years. But her entire time here, she was all North Pinellas. She never ventured south of Almerton Road. And now she is chomping at the bit to move to St. Petersburg. She was gushing this afternoon on the phone about St. Petersburg, and she could not believe. And I'm thinking, how in the world could you live in North Pinellas and not come to St. Pete? Even if it's just for the market, there are people who drive to the market from Tampa and Pasco County regularly. There are people who come from south of the Skyway to Saturday morning market regularly, but to live in our county and not know. Or our own star pitcher, David Price, when we opened the official opening for the grand opening for the Mahaffey, and David was there to speak. Yeah. And, you know, these young players, they moved to Tampa because it's a vibrant city. And he was gushing about the Mahaffey. For folks who weren't there, he was like, wow, I didn't know this was here. This is beautiful. He couldn't stop talking about it. And what we do have here, in so many cities I'm familiar with, the waterfront is not public. The waterfront is privately held by wealthy homeowners, and if you dare venture there, you're going to get arrested. And we have these beautiful open vistas, and for public use, the symphony in the park, on the waterfront, the Taste of Pinellas, the main sale.
I think the city should hire you as a spokesperson.
I can be a cheerleader in some aspects, but they know me well, so.
So would you talk about Dr. Carter G. Woodson Museum, African American Museum, and how it's been developed and where you see it going?
Well, it has a lot of potential, that's for sure. And in all fairness, I was not familiar with the Dr. Carter G. Woodson African American Museum until my dear friend Terry Scott had this idea about a Legends Ball. And I thought she was nuts. I thought she was out of her mind because I couldn't see initially. We were having lunch and she was talking about honoring the trailblazers of African American descent in our community who had never been honored here. And she was talking about something Oprah Winfrey had done. And of course, I don't watch Oprah Winfrey, so I wouldn't know what she had done. And so she sent the URL, I looked at it, and we did this fundraiser for this little museum that's off of 22nd on 9th Avenue South. And we raised $30,000. And I think that's the most money that had been raised for the organization. I think, I'm not sure. But back then we were not board members. We were just friends of the museum. And I think almost as soon as we raised that money, they threw the keys at us and ran away. We never saw those people again. We never saw them again. And so one of the things that happened before we were able to complete the Legends Ball, Leadership St. Pete class of 2008 decided that they wanted to there was a huge backyard behind the museum that was not developed. It was just a field of weeds. And now, I got to tell you, it's one of the best kept secrets in the city. It's a beautiful legacy garden. If you haven't seen it, go online, woodsonmuseum.org. It's absolutely beautiful. There are weddings there. The YWCA has their Take a Stand Against Racism there. There are plans for music under the oaks, poetry under the oaks. We've partnered with some people, some other organizations to hold events there. And it's every time it just makes me smile when people come there for the first time and they see it and they go, oh my God.
So what's the goal of the museum? I mean, what do you guys want to accomplish?
First of all, to raise more money than we have, to have a.
And then what are you going to do with the money? I mean, what's
the fantasy is, well, for me, and I know Elizabeth Brinklow knows this all too well, I'm a child of Spoleto. For those who don't know what Spoleto Festival is, it's an international arts festival that's in Charleston. 17 days. I think I was in the 4th or 5th grade when it came to Charleston. And it's one of these things that happens, and it comes and takes over the entire city, not just downtown. Sure, the core of it is downtown, but you involve young people, school kids, local artists, nationally known artists, international artists. When I say artists, I'm talking everything that encompasses the arts, including dance and theater and opera. And as a child, growing up into that, the first thing one thing I will never forget is seeing an African Yoruba tribe that was invited to Spoleto that came and did their interpretation of Macbeth. And that year, I think I was in the 7th grade, and the school just, each year Spoleto chose a grade level to attend the main event at the festival. And my grade level got chosen that year. And the school district didn't know what to do because we learned quickly that they were going to be in African garb and the women were going to be topless. And so the school district decided, well, we'll let the parents decide. So they sent notes home, and of course, we all forged our parents' names so that. And we also, anybody who had binoculars or opera glasses, we were there and passing it down the aisle so everybody could see that, yeah, they really were topless. Oh my God, look at that. And so, when you grow up in a community like that, you grow up with the arts and you understand the importance of it. And I think we have captured that for the Dali, which is a crown jewel, the Chihuly, but and even with the Holocaust Museum. But I think there's a void there, and we need to do better with the African American Museum to try to bring them to the table as well. There's all kinds of potential, not just with the history, but with art, with the arts as well. And so I think over a year ago, Hank, we met with Hank, me, Terry, I think Devron Gibbons, and somebody else, and he did this outreach. And he had an event. I helped organize it, but I couldn't attend because I was a night editor that night. But it was well attended. Well, I think there needs to be more collaboration for things like that, to forget about the fact that there is an African American museum here in town. And it's a shame that there's only one. When I moved here, there was one in Tampa. There was an African American Arts Museum, and I don't know whatever happened to that. When you think about a city, we live in a region that has over 3 million people, and we don't have that. I mean, there are ways to infuse the arts in different ways, and I think to be able to say, do some sort of outreach or to lend a helping hand to a small, struggling museum is a step in the right direction. Yeah.
So, who has a question for Sandra? Yes, could you stand up and say your name, please?
I'm Marla Beckner. First of all, I just wanted to thank you for what you do for the neighborhood time. I read it cover to cover. We also subscribe to the New York Times on the weekend, and we find that sometimes the rest of the paper just has articles from the Associated Press, Washington Post, New York Times, so I can kind of just dig through that. But I read yours cover to cover because I want to know what's happening at 620 and the Manhattan and Side Door,
Right.
and the Palladium, and in all the areas of arts. And so I would take your paper from now to the end of time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Who else has a question or a comment? Yes, could
I do.
Oh,
My name is Elizabeth Fry. I'm sorry.
that's okay.
I used to work for the Times for about 10 years. I felt very honored working for them at that period of time. I lived out in the beach since 1982, from the time I worked for the Times and the present period. And I still feel like the news coverage out there, we're like the unloved stepchildren. Why is that, since we are a tourism county?
Right.
We are a tourism state.
Mm-hmm.
And the tourists do buy the paper.
Right.
And time again, you'll look at the dispensers and they're empty before they're at popular appointment. Why aren't we covered? Why aren't we sending like that?
Just for, so I can answer your question, which beach do you live on?
Treasure Island.
You live in Treasure Island, okay. When we first started Neighborhood Times, we didn't even have a beach. The city did not cover the beaches at all. And so when we put a reporter out there, there was one reporter responsible for what we consider the beaches, is really 13 municipalities. Our beach coverage goes from Fort DeSoto Park to just south of Sand Key. And so in that stretch, there are 13 cities with different...
one reporter?
With one reporter, and right now it's really a correspondent. And what has happened, there's more dissent, I would say, in St. Pete Beach with the land development regulations. In Treasure Island, booze on the beach and caddies.
There was an article in this one about Bill Edwards in Treasure Island, because I just read that.
Right. But truthfully, you know, for someone who lives on Treasure Island to complain, and somebody from Bellear Beach saying, I haven't seen a story in weeks, or someone in Pasadena saying, what about us? And the truth be told, with a shrinking staff, and you're making sound judgments about what gets covered. The ongoing argument about a neighbor fighting Tony Amico over his parking lot, or which parking lot should be allowed to have folks from Caddy's Park, you know, which empty lot should, or some empty lot that he owns. That's not going to rise to the level of coverage when Madera Beach is losing, you know, every administrator, you know, to other cities. And so I think we have to pick and choose where we send that person.
I'm not specifically focusing on Treasure Island. I'm focusing on any beach that are going on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many events that go out there on the beach that are never covered
Right.
in the newspaper. And we have a much stronger chamber out here than the city of St. Petersburg does. They're an overwhelming mover and shaker out there, and still we do not get covered. And I don't mean to be controversial.
I know you
but,
know.
I mean, I having been a person before,
Right.
have a lot of admiration and a lot of favoritism toward this.
Well, it seems like a reasonable comment to make, and
Right.
one wants one's paper to cover all of the area. I mean, that
Yeah,
seems reasonable.
it is reasonable, and it's fair. It's a fair question.
Yeah.
But the truth, I'm just trying to tell you what is real.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably only going to be, I can tell you, Saturday and Sunday's paper, there's probably going to be 2 stories from the beaches. One's from Madera Beach, one from St. Pete Beach. There is just, one of the things, I've always been responsible for a beach community since I've been involved with Neighborhood Times. And I can tell you, I fought that battle too. And my editors will tell me, and they say it time and time again, there's a larger population in the city of St. Petersburg, then there's Largo, then there's Gulfport probably, and I think the largest beach city probably has 10, maybe 20,000 people. And so while you do have a section, I encourage people, and I spoke with someone from the women's chamber, which is older. They're having a major event, but like I say, we don't have a crystal ball I don't have a crystal ball on my desk anyway. And I tell people, pick up the phone, call, or send your information into local@sptimes.com. You'd be surprised how stories are written based on little tiny items that might run in a listing in Neighborhood Times. A reporter or a photographer or photo editor might get up and say, we need to cover this event Saturday. We try to cover a live event every Saturday for Sunday's paper. And the way to start, I mean, it's baby steps, I know, but it starts there, because they comb those listings to see what event is going to be maybe a big draw, maybe of interest to send a photographer, whoever's working Saturday, to cover. That's where it starts. And you'd be surprised how much traction goes into a little brief that runs in the paper. Woodson hosted a private screening of Red Tails on Saturday, and there was over 230 people that showed up for the event based on you know, that small item in the paper. It was just a listing. It wasn't a big story. And a lot of times people call the paper, I want a big story. I don't want that little brief thing. I want a big story. Well, ma'am, I know you're excited about that bird on the ledge, but we're not going to write a story about it.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Terry Hartman. I'm a NYU journalist and longtime Los Angeles publicist.
Mm-hmm.
And found myself, my husband and I moved here to work, not to retire, about 15 years ago. And there were 3 newspapers when I was in journalism school that were much respected and the St. Petersburg, so this was one of them. So it's a thrill for me to be here tonight and now be a part of this community. Where is the future of, now I can say to people, go on the internet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tampa.
Right.
Where is that going? Is that the future?
You know, we're such a copycat industry. And when one newspaper or all it takes is for the New York Times or some big organization or LA Times to say, we're going to do this. And then everybody follows suit. I can remember when I worked at the paper, in my hometown paper in Charleston, we had 2 papers. We had the Charleston Evening Post and the Post and the News and Courier. The Evening Post was making money and doing quite well, but that was at a time when everybody was getting rid of their evening paper. And so we shut down a very profitable product. Same thing with the internet. A few years ago, everybody decided to jump on this internet wave. The problem with newspapers is they were trying to replicate exactly what is here onto the internet, and that does not transcribe. I mean, it does not go over well. You have to do things differently. I had been on a web committee years ago, and I had suggested that we do things that make it more interactive. I taught a visual edge seminar at Poynter Institute for about 7 years, and that's where you layer the storytelling. In print, a story is flat, you read what's there, but with visual edge, you layer the storytelling by allowing the subject voice to be recorded and it comes to life. You can say in the story that she cried. By layering the storytelling, you can hear her cry. And those are the kind of things you can do online. Now, back to your question, there are more and more people who say, I have to touch it. I have to feel it. You said that to me just Tuesday morning over coffee. You know, I read lots of newspapers online. I'm a news junkie. I'm always looking at, did you read, you know, somebody will send a link and I will click on that link to a well-written story. There's nothing like reading a well-written story. But more and more now you're seeing that there will be video with stories, but people still go back to their paper. I mean, the TBT has been a prime example of the fact that there is a future in the print product. TBT, you take exactly what's in the St. Petersburg Times and in the Tampa Bay Times, but you condense the stories. And the goal was to, short, zippy news for these young people who don't have time to do anything. Well, these same young people who didn't have time to read a full story years ago when they were out clubbing or in the gym, they're still in the gym, but now they're married and they're raising families, and guess what? They graduated from TBT to the Tampa Bay Times. And so that's why we can say our growth in Hillsborough County has, my hometown paper is about the size of our distribution in Tampa, not the whole paper. So you can't ignore those numbers. I mean, if we have that kind of growth, and I can remember when I moved here, I thought Tampa was a black hole. I could not understand why the St. Pete Times was wasting their time in Tampa. Our readers were not subscribing to it, and now 115,000 readers later, who could ignore that? I mean, these are people getting the paper when the web is still there too. So.
Well, the one thing I like to say, because we need to stop, is that I certainly am grateful that there's people like you that are seriously working on the St. Pete Times, Tampa Bay Times.
I work on the St. Pete
yes.
Times.
And that you know, we have such a strong and famous paper here. Just like you said, when I did move to St. Pete, one of the reasons was because of the newspaper. And so let's thank Sandra for what she does and for being here.
Thank you. Oh, turn that off.